So I'm going to draw a visual here which represents, please fall back on your notes where you have written these two words, data sources and primary business objects or related business objects. I'm going to draw a visual here and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I have in front of you three automobile companies, Ford, Honda, and Volkswagen. And then each of these companies have these products, right? Like you have Ford F-150 Raptor, which is like a complete off-roading SUV. You have then you have a Ford Focus, which is more of a daily running highway car. Then you have a Honda Civic, which is a blend of comfort and very leisure ride, where you have a CRV, which is again a SUV model, and then you have Volkswagen Polo, which is like a very nice experience to drive, and then you have an Audi, which is like an epitome of luxury and performance. Now, the reason I'm doing this demonstration because this is a very weird way of learning the connection between data sources and business objects. Every report that we work with, we have to make sure our focus should always be what is the output that we need. Do we need the output to have all active workers? Do we need an output to have terminated workers? Do we need an output to have active and terminated workers? Are we looking for an output of time off information? Are we looking for an output for benefits information? Right. So Workday is a big database. We don't have access to Workday database. That's why we create reports. Now, when we create reports, we must understand how to pull data so that we don't spend too much time searching for what we need. That's why Workday gave us the concept of data sources, which is the first level filter. Write it down in your notes. Your data source is your first level filter for your data output. Now let's talk more about this example. So let's say your requirement is to have a family car, which is definitely friendly on your pocket, but also gives you the sense and feeling of a little bit of comfort, and basically it's a good safety rating and everything. So depending upon if you really need a family car, in my sense, it's either a Focus or a CRV. CRV is an SUV, you get a good boot space. Focus is also a sedan, so you again get good boot space. It's good for the long trips. But if your requirements is, you want luxury, you want performance, go for an Audi. If you stay on the countryside, or not just the countryside, wherever you stay, you're a fan of, off-roading vehicles, go for an Ford Raptor. But even before you pick the products, you first pick the company, depending upon multiple factors, like how's the service? How is the market of this company doing? Like Ford was pretty good in India back till 2020, but after 2024 didn't do good. Yeah. So Ford is no longer part of the Indian, like Ford does not release any new products in the India subcontinent. Right. So if I have to go with, if let's say I'm an off-roading person and if I have to go with an option, I would not select this. I'll rather go to someone else, because I know that if I buy it, it's a loss. It's not a win deal for me. I'll be in loss because I won't be able to sell it later. I won't get the right service that I need because the technicians are no longer here. So multiple factors you have to decide. And let's say you don't have a budget for a CRV, you can go for a Honda or a Ford Focus. So that's again something you decide based on the company that you pick. Right. So this is just a weird example. Same way, if you have to, let's say, pull a report which gives you information about employees and the transfer rate for different organizations, let's say in the span of 6 months. So in that case, you'll have to first select a data source which gives you the result of workers, and that too active workers, because you need data about those. But let's say if you want a report for attrition data is how many employees left a company in a certain period. You definitely need to use a different data source which gives you access to terminated workers as well. So your data source becomes your first level of filter for what you need. And then every data source has a one-on-one relationship with a business object, which is called as primary business object. Right. So in your notes, when you write where you have written as primary business object. Yeah. So every data source has a one-on-one relationship with a business object, and that business object is called as your primary business object. So if you see here, we have about 2,500 plus data sources. These are Workday delivered, and each data source has a primary business object. And how it works in your report. So let's say I'll filter on some of the most commonly used data sources, and I'll request you to even note these down. So I filtered on 4 data sources, all active and terminated workers. This is the most commonly used data source. It gives you information about all active and terminated workers in a report, and it relates, the one-on-one relationship is with the worker. But reverse is not true. Worker can be a primary business object for many other data sources. But this data source only has one primary business object. So I'll open it in another tab. Then all active employees has employee. Business process transactions has action event. Worker for HCM reporting has worker. Again, same business object, but this one only relates to this. This relates to many other data sources. And how it works is, and in your notes, please also add in these two things. Data sources are of 2 types. One is standard and the other is indexed. So like the one that we are looking at, workers for HCM reporting, is an indexed data source, which we can see here. The type is indexed, while all the others are standard. So indexed are used when performance is your first priority. But that kind of restricts us from using a lot of fields. So let's first connect data sources and objects. So it's always helpful to read description whenever it's available. So it says accesses the worker as a primary business object and returns 1 row per worker. Includes all active and terminated workers. For active workers, all related objects are reported as of the current date. For terminated workers, all objects are reported as of the last day. For trending reports, use trended workers. Okay, that's not important. So in this, these fields that you see are coming from your worker business object. If you recall, your business objects are nothing but tables in the system. We can think of them as database tables, right? And each table has a row and a column like we have it in Excel sheets. But in this case, your row are the instances and your columns are your fields. So please write that down as well. Business object or table has instances and fields. Right next to instances, write down rows. For fields, write down columns. Yeah. So the way we whenever we create a report, you have to first define a data source. In this case, it's defined as workers for HCM reporting. And if you see something, a primary business object, we don't populate this gets auto-populated. We only have to decide the data source, depending upon what kind of output we need. This is, again, a very good data source, which any kind of worker-related information you can pull in it. But if you want to go more specific, like their benefits, their time off absence information, this might not be the best data source. And I'll take a pause and add something here is that reporting is not something we can literally learn in one session. Reporting takes good amount of time. Why? Because one particular requirement can be created through multiple ways based on your years of experience working with reports. Right? So let's say today, if someone comes to me and say that I need a new hire report with this and this information, I won't just create a report. I'll create a report so that it's dynamic enough that anybody else who has some similar requirements can use it, because I have that experience to create such a report. But for someone who's completely new to the reporting, they'll just create a static report and add in the fields and everything and would not make it more dynamic. So that's why I'm saying the more experience you get, and that only comes from working real time with reports at your job when you get started. Okay, but understand the concept here on how to create a report and what are the basic concepts. Okay, and the connection between data sources and business objects is always a struggle. Even today, if I get a complex requirement that I have to give some payroll information, I still struggle to find the right data source and filters, because Workday is so huge, you cannot work with all data sources all the time. But the ones that I filtered are some of the most common ones that we use on a daily or weekly basis. All right. Now, coming to this particular example, you can see here, this is the data source that we are using, and this is the primary business object. Right now, they have not added anything here, and the report type is advanced because this is a custom report. So that's why advanced. Let's say if I edit this, you can see here my first row automatically gives me this. So I can pull a field here, let's say employee ID. Okay. And you can see here, this is coming from your worker business object. So having a primary business object means I can directly pull fields from this business object in my report. I can pull more information, like work location or something. Calculated fields. I can add their legal names. And when you're practicing, make sure that you always go to the related actions button of each field that you add, and make sure it's coming from the business object, which is your primary business object. So likewise, I can add fields here from my worker business object. This is just very, all right, so this is your first point of hands-on, where you create a report and add in few fields. Now, we have not discussed creation of report yet, because for that is the reason we did the data source and business object activity. So now if I run this report, let's just test it, because running it will give a lot of big data source. Testing just give you 10 records. So there you go, employee ID, legal first name. Now, in this case, these are your columns: employee ID, legal name, primary business object. And these are different report fields, which are coming from your business object. So this is what it means when I say your business object is a table which has instances and fields. So your fields are these columns, and your instances are each and every row output that you see here. These are your instances. Now let's jump in and create a report from the beginning. We use the task create custom report. Ideally, you would very rarely use this task because in majority of the time, it makes sense that we copy a report instead of creating a fresh one. But since we are learning it from scratch, we should know how to create it. Okay, so always follow naming convention since we're creating a custom report, and then you can add in your initials or add in your company's name. That I leave that to you, but definitely add CR. It tells us anyone that it's a custom report. And then we do a new hire report. In the report details section, we select the type. We'll always select advanced. When you actually become an advanced reporting analyst, then you might use like matrix or composite or maybe a trending report, but we'll run advanced. When you hover over this, you get a list of basically a description of other report types. We can skip these for now. Now data source, if you see something. So yes. Data source. So this selection depends on what kind of report output you need. Now my requirement is I need new hire information. And not just that, I want a new hire information for a specific date range because managers keep reaching out to me asking what is my organization staffing looks like. Okay, so I need to make sure that many, like not just one manager, multiple managers across my company should be able to use that report. Now, from that requirements, the first thing that is very much clear to me that it has to be about active employees or about workers who are active. So I have multiple data sources, but I can select from, but the fields, what information we need in that report, that also contributes in deciding what data source I need. So in requirements like this, I cannot just work with a requirement where a manager comes to me and asks me, I need a new hire report for my organization in the last 6 months. That's not a requirement. I'll have to go back, and this is our responsibility as a consultant. I'll have to go back to the requester or the manager asking what information do you need about that new hire? Do you need their employee IDs? Do you need their hire date? Do you need if they were rehire? Do you need to know which organization they were hired? Do you need to know what job profile they are hired for? Do you need to know what their salary is? So all this information you have to ask through relevant questions. You have to go back to your requester and ask these questions. What fields, what information do you actually need about that new hire? So let's say if they say we need information, just basic information like work location, employee ID, hire date, we can use any data source which gives you active employee record. But let's say they want information, let's say if a requirement is coming in from a benefits manager, which is asking for, I want to know who all enrolled in what benefit plan. Then my data source will change. Not just my data source, because in that case, that information cannot be pulled from your general data sources that we have listed up. And that would definitely be counted as an advanced, something an advanced reporting analyst would be able to do quickly, something we might struggle initially since we are learning reports. So let's say the requirement is simple, new hire report with some basic information. Okay, so I can use workers for HCM reporting. And in this case, I can also use all active and terminated worker data source, but that is not indexed. So in that case, I'll have to remove this. Let's say if you're using this, make sure you disable this, then select all active and terminated. Since all active and terminated data source is a standard data source, you can see there's a symbol here, which is like multiple disks laid over each other. That represents a standard data source, and the flash sign represents a indexed. So if your requirement is fulfilled by a standard data source, you cannot select this because there is no point of this. But if you want to use an indexed data source, like I said, it's more for performance. It gives you speed over others. Let's say your data output, let's say you have two reports, both gives you a record of 10,000 instances, 10,000 workers. So the one which you use for indexed data source will run much faster than the standard report. Right? Something we don't have to worry about right now because these are mostly used by your index data source, are mostly used by your integration consultants who are more focused on performance because the data flows in and out of the Workday system. Okay, but Workday Workers for HCM reporting is a very, very good starting point to learn reports. So we'll use that. And since it's an indexed type data source, as you can see here, data source type is indexed, it automatically gets selected. Now, in the next page, you come into the edit mode. Now, this interface is your report writer, which you have it in your notes. There are three types of report writer. So this is your tool. This is your Workday report writer tool. And if you notice something, all data sources, we have it. There are some data source filter, which we'll talk about later, and your primary business object, which automatically came in here. Okay. Now, this particular business object has a list of fields which you can directly use in your reports. Something like we already did, employee ID. Make sure it's coming from your primary business object. We'll add some more information like hire date. Now you can see there are multiple hire dates. So select the one which relates to your primary business object. It's coming from your worker primary business object. Then let's add some more fields like again, their last name, their manager information, something like that. First name here, this is the last name. What's this? Let's see if you can pull some manager information about there. Now, you see here, it says calculated fields. We are not going to use that right now. So someone whoever created this did not create it the right way. Maybe the logic is right, but they did not name it correctly because this is misleading. Right now, whatever fields we are using Workday delivered fields. Right? We'll take it one step at a time. We just cannot jump onto calculated fields so quickly. So you can see there are multiple levels. So if you want to give them an immediate manager, you can use this. You can even read the description. Immediate manager for workers position. But let's say I want to give them, 2 levels of manager. So I can do that. And the reason I'm able to quickly add this is because I worked with reports like so many times. So I now know them. If you taught me the first month of my reporting experience, yeah, it took me a lot of time to even search for these fields. But now I can do them with a flick easily. So this is what experience gives you in reporting. So manager, and this column error override, it gives you a good way of renaming the field so that the end user does not get confused. Manager, and add in like first name, then the last name. And there was another requirement which says if the employee is rehired, so there's a field which says is rehire. It's a Boolean field. Again, see, someone has not named it correctly. Calculated fields must always start with CF. This is again not the right way of naming it. This is the worker field. It says returns yes. If the processing worker is a rehire, a worker is considered to be rehired if they have been hired more than once in the past and they are not terminated. So this is what we need. I think that suffices. So you click OK and you do a test run. Then run the report. You don't add any fields here right now. See, you have a record of 8,000 employees, 8,000 plus employees. And these are all the fields that we added. Employee ID, hire date, first name, last name, manager, manager's manager is rehire. Some of them are rehire. So let's say if I want to filter, I want the ones who are rehired in that report. I can dynamically work with this report real time. What does that mean? I can literally click on this and filter that my value is yes. Now you can see I'm only seeing 94 records out of 8,000 plus records. Likewise, I can do for all the fields. And this comes from the security that you will have. If you don't have the security, if let's say a manager is just running this report, they won't have this. Like they'll be able to filter it out, but not everything that we can do here. Right now, we have there's nothing dynamic or static. What I meant by that is right now you will consider this as a static report. I still cannot give this report to my manager and tell them to run it because this is giving me data for all the new hires in the system. Literally, you can see the hire date is starting from 1/1/2000. So we have this is literally giving information about every employee in the system, irrespective of whether basically they're giving their hire date and all this information. We have not yet reached to a stage where we have embedded a logic in the report which filters on a particular date range and for a particular manager. Right now, we have just done the first step of adding the fields that we need in the report.